Hey gang, my name's Phil Cummings. I from Honolulu, Hawaii. I graduated from Roosevelt High School in 1975. I kind of had an interesting career path. While I was growing up, I was really interested in helicopters. So when I graduated from Roosevelt, I enlisted into the United States Army because they had the most helicopters, and I spent time in Germany working on the CH-54 Sky Cranes and the CH-47 Chinooks. After I got out of the Army, I returned to Hawaii and joined the Hawaii Army National Guard and served in the aviation unit at Wheeler Army Airfield. I also went back to school, University of Hawaii. I was lucky enough to land a job working at Sikorsky Aircraft, which is based in Connecticut. Sikorsky at the time, and it still is, the largest manufacturer of helicopters in the world. Sikorsky builds the Black Hawk that the Army flies, the Seahawk that the Navy flies, the CH-53Es that the U.S. Marines fly. They also build all of the presidential helicopters, and they also build the S-76 and S-92, which are commercial helicopters that are used both in offshore operations, and they also are used for executive transport. In fact, President Trump owns two S-76 helicopters in his private life. I joined the Army because they had the most helicopters, and that gave me the opportunity to work on helicopters, to gain some real hands-on knowledge, and then that coupled with going back to school afforded me that opportunity at Sikorsky. When I started at Sikorsky, I started as a technician, so I was actually doing maintenance on helicopters, and I was assigned to the Seahawk test program. The Navy, after the Army had bought the Black Hawk, decided that they wanted a maritime version of the Black Hawk. So I worked on the test program for the Navy version, which was the Seahawk. That test program included time spent at Patuxent River, Maryland, which is where the Navy does their test programs. I also spent time out at sea, as we had to do sea trials with the aircraft to prove that they were capable of operating aboard ships. After that program was over, I ended up being assigned to NAS North Island, which is in San Diego, as a Sikorsky rep to help the Navy as those aircraft were being implemented into the naval fleet. I spent 5 years there at North Island, and then went on to be promoted to be the senior rep and introduce a new line of naval helicopters, the H-860Hs, at Point Mugu, California. That particular aircraft was designed to be a combat SAR aircraft for the Navy. It was capable of doing long-range combat search and rescue missions, and was also used for special operations. So I had an opportunity to not only work alongside my naval customers in the squadron, but had the opportunity to work alongside many of our Navy SEAL teams in the United States Navy. While I was working with that squadron, I ended up going to Desert Storm with them as a civilian. We were located near the Iraqi border, and the first attacks on Iraq during the Desert Storm were performed from the airfield I was at, and our aircraft participated in that attack as support aircraft to perform combat SAR in the event that any of the aircraft that were involved with the initial attacks had their crews requiring rescue. After I left that position at Point Mugu, I was promoted into a regional manager's job, which I was responsible for all the Sikorsky reps west of the Mississippi River and including Asia. And there was one exception to the Mississippi River as the boundary. I also had Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which had at the time the largest concentration of Black Hawks in the United States Army. That was an interesting assignment because I traveled around the region, meeting with the admirals, generals, and military operators in the various areas. One of the good things for me on that assignment was Hawaii was part of that assignment, and I got to make trips home on the company's expense, which was great. So I used to go back to Hawaii to visit, obviously, the units out at Wheeler. I also went over to Barking Sands because we had a rep working with the Pacific Missile Range there. After that assignment, I moved on to work in the programs office back in Connecticut, working on the Taiwanese and Greek Seahawk programs. So I had an opportunity to work with some foreign governments, which was very interesting. They do things a lot different than our military does, obviously. And of course, there was some, cultural barriers. Fortunately for me, growing up in Hawaii, dealing with the Chinese in particular, Taiwanese, a lot of the foods, a lot of the customs I was familiar with because I grew up with that in Hawaii. So that made it a little bit easier for me. The final assignment I had at Sikorsky before I retired was I was assigned to head up the airframes team at Corpus Christi Army Depot, which is here in Texas. I now live in Waco, Texas. That assignment was very interesting because the United States military, and in particular Department of Defense, actually decided that they wanted to transform the U.S. military to become more like civilian companies. So CCAD is where the Army performs overhaul and repairs for the Black Hawk aircraft, the CH-47 Chinooks, and the Apaches. So the Army decided that they wanted to form a partnership with Sikorsky to improve the depot maintenance that was being done on the Blackhawks. The Army was not happy that it was taking the depot in excess of 500 days to get an aircraft into the depot and have all the required rework done on it, and then sent back out into the fleet. So my job and the job of my Sikorsky team that I was in charge of was to improve the days to get the aircraft back to the customer. Many of you maybe are learning about this in school today or have read about it, but there are several techniques that are used in improving production flow. You may have heard of the term lean. You may have heard of the term Six Sigma. At Sikorsky, we adopted the lean process for our own production lines back in Connecticut. And that's what we tried to instill into the production lines that the Army was running at their depot. At the time of me leaving the depot and retiring, we had completed, or I should say improved the time from over 500 days down to about 230 days. So we cut it in more than half. And after I left, the days actually went down even further. It was an interesting assignment, working alongside our civilian counterparts. It was a tough assignment. There was a lot of animosity because they thought that we were coming in there to take jobs away or replace them. What you will find if you ever participate in some of these process improvements is that more times than not, it's not removing people. In some cases, in fact, at CCAD, we ended up adding people because we found they weren't adequately staffed to perform the jobs that needed to be done. At any rate, I know your teacher asked for these kind of videos, and I wanted to let you know, especially growing up there in Hawaii, that don't let your sights be limited because you live in Hawaii. I was a kid from Hawaii who had a dream, pursued it, got to work for a, world-renowned helicopter company. In fact, I got a letter from our personnel department when I started at Sikorsky that I was the first employee they had of Hawaiian descent. So that was kind of cool. And I really thought that's pretty neat. But pursue your dreams. There's a lot of things to do besides working in hotels, working in restaurants, working on cruise ships. Take advantage of things. You're coming into an era. I know right now it's not very good with the pandemic that's going on, But this country is full of opportunities, especially for people who want to chase their dreams. So all I would say is study hard, listen to your teachers, listen to your parents. I'm a parent of three kids. All three of my kids graduated from Baylor University here in Texas, and are all doing very well in their jobs. They had their dreams and they pursued them. So continue to do well in school, stay safe, listen to your teachers. Aloha.